Welcome to Jimi Zen Reads. Hans Christian Andersen, The Nightingale. In China, as you well know, the emperor is Chinese, and all around him are Chinese also. Now, what I am about to relate happened many years ago, but even on that very account, it is more important that you should hear the story at once before it is forgotten. The emperor's palace was the most magnificent palace in the world. It was made entirely of fine porcelain, exceedingly costly, but at the same time so brittle that it was dangerous even to touch it. The choicest flowers were to be seen in the garden, and to the most splendid of all, these silver bells were fastened in order that their tinkling might prevent anyone passing by without noticing them. Yes, everything in the emperor's garden was excellently well arranged, and the garden extended so far that even the gardener did not know the end of it. Whoever walked beyond it, however, came to a beautiful wood with very high trees, and beyond that to a lake, and among the branches dwelt a nightingale, who sang so sweetly that even the poor fisherman, who had so much else to do, when he came out at night time to cast his nets, he would stand still and listen to her song. "Oh, how pretty that is," he would say, but then he was obliged to mind his work and forget about the bird. Yet the following night again the nightingale sang, and the fisherman came out again, who would exclaim, "Oh, how pretty that is." Travellers came from all parts of the world to see the emperor's city, and they admired the city, the palace, and the garden. But if they heard the nightingale, they said this is the best of all, and they talked about her after they went home. And learned men wrote books about the city, the palace, and the garden. Nor did they forget the nightingale. She was extolled above everything else, and poets wrote the most beautiful verses about the nightingale of the wood near the lake. These books went round the world, and one of them at last reached the emperor. He was sitting in his golden armchair. He read and read, and nodded his head every moment, for these splendid descriptions of the city, the palace, and the garden pleased him greatly. But "There is nothing like the nightingale," was written in the book. "What in the world is this?" said the emperor. "The nightingale? I do not know it at all. Can there be such a bird in my empire, in my garden even, without my having heard of it? Truly one may learn something from books." So he called his gentleman usher. Now this was so grand a personage that no one of inferior rank might speak to him, and if one did venture to ask him a question, his only answer was "pish," which has no particular meaning. "There is said to be a very remarkable bird here called the nightingale," said the emperor. "Her song, they say, is worth more than anything else in all my dominions. Why has no one ever told me of her?" "I have never before heard her mentioned," said the gentleman usher. "She has never been presented at court." "I wish her to come and sing before me this evening," said the emperor. "The whole world knows what I have, and I do not know it myself." "I have never before heard her mentioned," said the gentleman usher, "but I will seek her. I will find her." But where was she to be found? The gentleman usher ran up one flight of steps, down another, through halls, and through passages. Not one of all whom he met had ever heard of the nightingale, so the gentleman usher returned to the emperor and said, "It must certainly be an invention of the man who wrote the book. Your Imperial Majesty must not believe all that is written in books. Much in them is pure invention, and there is what is called the black art." "But the book in which I have read," returned the emperor, "was sent to me by the high and mighty Emperor of Japan, and therefore it cannot be untrue. I wish to hear the nightingale this evening. She must be here this evening, and if she do not come after supper, the whole court shall be flogged." "Zippy!" exclaimed the gentleman usher, and again he ran up the stairs and down the stairs, through halls and through passages, and half the court ran with him, for not one of them would have relished a flogging. Many were the questions asked respecting the wonderful Nightingale, whom the whole world talked of, and about whom no one at court knew anything. At last they met a poor little girl in the kitchen, who said, "Oh yes, the Nightingale. I know her very well. Oh, how she can sing! Every evening I carry fragments left at the table to my poor sick mother. She lives in the lakeside, and when I am coming back and stay to rest in the wood, I hear the nightingale sing. It makes the tears come to my eyes. It is just as if my mother kissed me." "Little kitchen maid," said the gentleman usher, "I will procure for you a sure appointment in the kitchen, together with permission to see His Majesty the Emperor dine, if you will conduct us to the Nightingale, for she is expected at court this evening." So they went together to the wood where the Nightingale was accustomed to sing, and half the court went with them there. Whilst on their way, a cow began to low. "Oh," cried the court pages, "that must be the Nightingale. It certainly is an extraordinary voice, so small an animal. Surely I've heard it somewhere before." "No, those are cows you hear lowing," said the little kitchen maid. "We are still far away from the place." The frogs were now croaking in the pond. "That is famous," said the chief court preacher. "Now I hear it. Sounds like it, just like church bells." "No, those are frogs," said the little kitchen maid. "But now I think we shall hear her soon." Then the Nightingale began to sing. "There she is," said the little girl. "Listen, listen. There she sits," and pointed to a little grey bird up in the branches. "Is it possible?" said the gentleman usher. "I should not have thought it. How simple she looks. She must certainly have changed colour at the sight of so many distinguished personages." "Little Nightingale," called out the kitchen maid, "our gracious Emperor wishes you to sing something to him." "With the greatest of pleasure," replied the Nightingale, and she sang in such a manner that it was delightful to hear. "It sounds like glass bells," said the gentleman usher, "and look at her little throat, how it moves. It is singular that we should never have heard her before. She will have great success at court." "Shall I sing again to the Emperor?" asked the Nightingale, for she thought the Emperor was amongst them. "Most excellent Nightingale," said the gentleman usher, "I have the honour to invite you to a court festival, which is to take place this evening, when His Imperial Majesty will doubtless be enchanted with your delightful song." "My song would sound far better among the green trees," said the Nightingale. However, she followed willingly when she heard that the Emperor wished it. There was a general cleaning and polishing at the palace. The walls and the floors, which were all porcelain, glittered with 1,000 gold lamps. The loveliest flowers, with the merriest tinkling of bells, were placed in the passages. There was running to and fro, which made all the bells ring, so that one could not hear one's own words. In the midst of the grand hall, where the Emperor sat, a gold perch was erected, on which the Nightingale was to sit. The whole court was present, and the little kitchen maid received permission to stand behind the door, for she had now actually the rank and title of maid of the kitchen. All were dressed out in their finest clothes, and all eyes were fixed upon the little grey bird, to whom the Emperor nodded as a signal for her to begin. And the Nightingale sang so sweetly that tears came into the Emperor's eyes. Tears rolled down his cheeks, and the Nightingale sang more sweetly still, and touched the hearts of all who heard her, and the emperor was so delighted that he said the nightingale should have his golden slippers and wear them around her neck. But the nightingale thanked him and said she was already sufficiently rewarded. I have seen tears in the emperor's eyes. That is the greatest reward I could have. The tears of an emperor have a particular value. Heaven knows I'm sufficiently rewarded. And then she sang again with her sweet, lovely voice. It is the sweetest thing ever heard, said the ladies present. And they put the water to their mouths and tried to move their throats as she did when they spoke. They thought by this means to become nightingales also. Indeed, even the footmen and chambermaids declared that they were quite contented, which was a great thing to say, for all the people they are the most difficult to satisfy. Yes, indeed, the nightingale's success was complete. She was now to remain at court, to have her own cage, with permission to fly out twice in the day and once in the night. 12 attendants were allotted her, who were to hold a silken band fastened around her foot, and they kept a good hold. There was no pleasure in excursions made in this manner. All the city was talking of the wonderful bird, and when two persons met, one would say only night, and the other would say gale, and then they sighed and understood each other perfectly. Indeed, 11 of the children of the citizens were named after the nightingale, but none of them had her voice. One day a large parcel arrived for the emperor, on which was written Nightingale. Here we have another new book about our far-famed bird, said the emperor. But it was not a book, it was a little piece of mechanism, lying in the box, an artificial nightingale, which was intended to look like the living one, but was covered all over with diamonds, rubies, and sapphires. When this artificial bird had been wound up, it could sing one of the tunes that the real nightingale sang, and its tail, all glittering with silver and gold, went up and down all the time. A little band was fastened around its neck, on which was written, "The nightingale of the Emperor of Japan is poor compared with the nightingale of the Emperor of China." "That is splendid," said everyone, and he who had brought the bird obtained the title of Imperial Nightingale Bringer. "Now they shall sing together, and we shall have a duet." And so they must sing together, but it did not succeed, for the real nightingale sang in her own way, and the artificial bird produced its tones by wheels. "It is not his fault," said the artist. "He keeps exact time and quite according to method." So the artificial bird must now sing alone. He was quite as successful as the real nightingale, and then he was so much prettier to look at. His plumage sparkled with jewels. 33 times he sang one and the same tune, and yet he was not weary. Everyone would willingly have heard him again, but the emperor now wished the real nightingale to sing something. But where was she? No one had remarked that she had flown out of the open window, flown away to her own green wood. "What is the meaning of this?" said the emperor, and all the courtiers abused the nightingale and called her a most ungrateful creature. "We have the best bird at all the events," said they, and for the 34th time they heard the same tune, but still they do not quite know it, because it was so difficult. The artist praised the clockwork bird to the skies and declared it was superior to the real nightingale, not only of its exterior, all sparkling with diamonds, but also in its voice. "For see, my noble lords, his imperial majesty, his imperial majesty especially, with the real nightingale, one could never reckon on what was coming. But everything is settled with the artificial bird. He will sing in this one way and no other. This can be proved. He can be taken to pieces, and the works can be shown where the wheels lie, how they move, and how one follows from one another. That is just what I think, said everybody. And the artist received permission to show the bird to the people on the following Sunday. They too shall hear him sing, said the emperor. So they heard him, and were well pleased, as if they had been drinking tea, for it is tea that makes the Chinese merry. And they all said, "Oh," and raised their forefingers and nodded their heads. But the fisherman, who had heard the real nightingale, said, "It sounds very pretty, almost like the real bird, but yet there is something wanting. I know not what." The real nightingale was, however, banished from the empire. The artificial bird had his place on a silken cushion close to the emperor's bed. All the presents he received, gold and precious stones, lay around him. He had obtained the rank and title of High Imperial Dessert Singer, and therefore his place was number 1 at the left side of the emperor. Thought that it was the side where the heart was situated, must be the place of honour, and the heart is situated on the left side of an emperor, as well as with other folks. And the artist who wrote 25 volumes about the artificial bird, with the longest and most difficult words that are to be found in the Chinese language. So, of course, all said they had read and understood them. Otherwise, they would have been thought stupid, and perhaps would have been flogged. Thus it went on for a whole year. The emperor of the court and all of the Chinese knew. Thus it went on for a whole year. The emperor, the court, and all the Chinese knew every note of the artificial bird's song by heart. But that was the very reason they enjoyed it so much. They could now sing with him. The little boys in the street sang "Zee, zee, zee, cluck, cluck, cluck." And the emperor himself sang too. Yes, indeed, that was very charming. But one evening, when the bird was in full voice and the emperor lay in bed and listened, there was suddenly a noise, bang, inside the bird. Then something sprang, srrrp. All the wheels were running around, and the music stopped. The emperor jumped quickly out of bed and had his chief physician called. But of course, what use could he be? Then a clockmaker was fetched, and at last, after a great deal of discussion and consultation, the bird was in some measure put to rights again. But the clockmaker said that he must be spared such singing, for the pegs were almost worn out, and it was impossible to renew them, at least so that the music should be correct. There was great lamentation, for now the artificial bird was allowed to sing only once a year, and even then there were difficulties. However, the artist made a short speech full of his favourite long words, and said the bird was as good as ever. So then, of course, it was as good as ever. When 5 years were passed away, a great affliction visited the whole empire. In their hearts the people thought highly of their emperor, and now he was ill, and he was reported that he could not live. A new emperor had already been chosen, and the people stood in the street outside the palace and asked the gentleman usher how the emperor was. "Pish," said he, and shook his head. Cold and pale lay the emperor in his magnificent bed. All the court believed him to be already dead, and everyone had hastened away to greet the new emperor. The men ran out for a little gossip on the subject, and the maids were having a grand coffee party. The floors of all the rooms and passages were covered with cloth, in order that not a step should be heard. It was everywhere so still, so very still. But the emperor was not yet dead. Though stiff and pale, he lay in his splendid bed, with long velvet curtains and heavy gold tassels. A window was opened above, and the moon shone down on the emperor and the artificial bird. The poor emperor could scarcely breathe, for it appeared to him as though something was sitting on his chest. He opened his eyes and saw that it was Death who had put on the emperor's crown and held with one hand the golden scimitar, with the other the splendid imperial banner, whilst from under the folds of the thick velvet hangings the strangest looking heads were seen peering forth, some with an expression absolutely hideous, and others with an extremely gentle and lovely aspect. They were the bad and the good deeds of the emperor, which now all fixing their eyes upon him, whilst death sat on his heart. "Recollect'st thou this?" whispered they, after one another. "Dost thou remember that?" And as thus remember, they went on reproaching him until the sweat broke out upon his forehead. "I have never known anything like it," said the emperor. "Music, music, the great Chinese drum," cried he. "Let me not hear what they are saying." But they went on, and Death, quite in Chinese fashion, nodded his head to every word. "Music, music," cried the emperor. "Thou dear little artificial bird, sing, I pray thee sing. I have given thee gold and precious stones. I have even hung my golden slippers around thy neck. Sing, I pray thee, sing." But the bird was silent. There was no one there to wind him up, and he could not sing without. Death continued to stare at the emperor with his great hollow eyes, and everywhere it was still, fearfully still. All at once the sweetest song was heard from the window. It was the little living nightingale, who was sitting on a branch outside. She had heard of her emperor's severe illness, and she was come to sing him of comfort and hope. As she sang, the spectral forms began paler and paler. The blood flowed more and more quickly through the emperor's feeble limbs, and even Death listened and said, "Go on, little nightingale, go on. Wilt thou give me the splendid gold scimitar? Wilt thou give me the gay banner and the emperor's crown?" And Death gave up all these treasures for a song, and the nightingale sang on. She sang of the quiet churchyard, where the white roses blossom, where the elder tree sends forth its fragrance, and the fresh grass is bedewed with the tears of sorrowing friends of the departed. Then Death was seized with longing after his garden, and like a cold, white shadow flew out of the window. "Thanks, thanks," said the emperor, "thou heavenly little bird. I know thee well. I have banished thee from my realm, and thou hast sung away the evil faces from my bed, and death from my heart. How shall I reward thee?" "Thou hast already rewarded me," said the nightingale. "I have seen tears in thine eyes, as when I sang to ye the first time. Those I shall never forget. They are jewels which do so much good to a minstrel's heart. But sleep now, and wake fresh and healthy. I will sing thee to sleep." And she sang, and the emperor fell into a sweet sleep. Oh, how soft and kindly was that sleep! The sun shone, and in the window when he awoke, strong and healthy. Not one of his servants had returned, for they all believed him dead. But the nightingale still sat and sang. "Thou shalt always stay with me," said the emperor. "Thou shalt only sing when it pleases thee, and the artificial bird I will break into 1,000 pieces." "Do not so," said the nightingale. "Truly he has done what he could. Take care of him. I cannot stay in the palace, but let me come when I like. I will sit on the branches close to the window in the evening and sing to thee, that thou mayest become happy and thoughtful. I will sing to thee of the joyful and the sorrowing. I will sing to thee of all that is good or bad, which is concealed from thee. The little minstrel flies afar to the fisherman's hut, to the peasant's cottage, to all who are far and distant from thee and thy court. I love thy heart more than I love thy crown, and yet The crown has an odour of something holy about it. I will come, I will sing, but thou must promise me one thing." "Everything," said the emperor, and now he stood in his imperial splendour, which he had put on himself, and held the scimitar so very heavy with gold to his heart. "One thing I beg of thee, let no one know that thou hast a little bird who tells thee everything. Then all will go on well." And the nightingale flew away. The attendants came to look at their dead emperor. Lo, there they stood astonished, and the emperor said, "Good morning." The end.